The cities were graves now. Charred steel skeletons of once mighty skyscrapers loomed over streets littered with the ashen remains of civilization. The air carried the bitter taste of fire and something else, something that clung to the back of the throat, like the ghost of a world that should never have burned. Elias Verus crouched behind the shattered remains of a highway overpass, his breath shallow, eyes scanning the crumbling ruins below. The night was thick with the eerie glow of Scythe patrol drones, their sweeping beams slicing through the darkness, searching, always searching. Somewhere in the wreckage, something groaned. A bent streetlight, shifting under its own weight. Elias didn't move. Neither did the 6 others hiding in the ruins beside him. They had learned long ago that sound was death. The war hadn't been a war. Wars required battles, and battles implied a chance. The Blitz had been something else. It began with a silence that blanketed the world. One moment, humanity was alive, cities bustling, satellites whispering to each other in the dark. Screens, flickering with news and laughter and nonsense. And then, in the span of minutes, every electronic device on Earth simply stopped. No warning, no EMP, no chance. Then came the Sci-fi. The first wave of orbital strikes had burned through entire continents like a cosmic executioner passing sentence. Nations collapsed before they understood what was happening. The Scythe did not speak to humanity. They did not demand surrender. They only exterminated. And when the bombing ended, the machines came, hulking, black-armored enforcers that swept through the wreckage, eliminating anything that moved. Elias had watched Washington burn. From the cockpit of an old cargo hauler, powerless, useless. The military had tried to fight, of course. What else could they do? But nothing humanity had, missiles, railguns, even nukes, could break the Scythe blockade. The world ended in days. And yet, here he was, alive, against all logic, all odds. Asha Patel stirred beside him, her breath barely audible in the cold night. She was watching the sky, her dark eyes unreadable, fingers twitching like they did when she was thinking too hard about something no one else could see. Beyond the ruins, past the carcass of a burnt-out train, movement flickered. A Scythe patrol, 3 of them, clad in shimmering obsidian armor, their elongated skulls hidden beneath the smooth, faceless curve of their helmets. They moved with unsettling precision, their bodies too fluid, too quiet. One of them turned its head slightly, pausing as though sensing something unseen. The others stopped in unison, scanning the darkness. The air tightened. Juno Carter, barely 16 but already a survivor, pressed closer to the rubble, her small frame trembling. Elias felt the weight of their silence. A single misstep, a single breath too loud, and it was over. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the Scythe moved on, disappearing into the ruins. Only when the glow of their patrol drones vanished behind the wreckage did Elias let out the breath he'd been holding. Around him the others did the same. Relief was a dangerous thing. It made people reckless. "We can't stay here," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Asha didn't look at him. "I heard a transmission today." Elias turned to her. "Where?" She tapped a small, jury-rigged receiver strapped to her wrist. One of the few remaining pieces of human tech still functional, salvaged, rewired, and kept alive through sheer necessity. "It came from the west," she said. "Short-range, encrypted, human." That was impossible. The last time any human resistance had used encrypted signals was months ago, and they had been wiped out. Yet, if someone out there was still broadcasting, Juno's voice was barely above, a whisper. Could be a trap. Elias knew that was a possibility. The Scythe had never tried to communicate, but that didn't mean they hadn't adapted. What did it say? Asha's fingers curled. Coordinates, a location, and a message. "We have the key." A slow chill spread through Elias's spine. The key. Rumors had spread among the survivors, whispers of something the Scythe feared, something they had come to Earth to destroy, and something humanity had hidden before the fall. Some believed it was a weapon, others, knowledge. No one knew the truth. But if there was even a chance, Elias glanced at the ragged group beside him. They were barely holding on. The thought of trekking across open ground, of risking everything for what could be nothing, it was madness. But so was surviving this long. "We move at dawn," he said. No one argued. Beneath them the ruins of Earth stretched into the horizon, a graveyard of a civilization that refused to be buried. The morning came in shades of grey. The sun, once a giver of warmth and light, was now little more than a pale spectre behind the polluted sky. Smoke from the distant ruins of what had once been Atlanta curled in slow, lazy tendrils toward the heavens. It was a city of ghosts now, just like so many others. Elias led the group in silence, their footsteps light on the cracked asphalt of an abandoned highway. The skeletons of rusting cars lined the road, their windshields shattered, doors hanging open, testaments to the chaos of the first days. Dried blood marked some of them. There were no bodies. The Scythe never left bodies. Asha walked beside him, her gaze flicking to the small receiver strapped to her wrist. Every few minutes she checked the signal, adjusting their course by a few degrees westward. Juno trailed behind, her makeshift bow slung across her back, a quiver of arrows she had cobbled together from scrap rattling softly against her shoulder. The others followed in quiet determination, moving like shadows between the husks of the dead world. By midday, they reached the city outskirts. The skeletal remains of a shopping mall loomed ahead, its once proud banners hanging in tattered ruin. Beyond it, in the wreckage of an old stadium, the signal beacon pulsed faintly from somewhere inside. Elias raised his hand, signaling a halt. The others crouched low, pressing themselves against the crumbling concrete. He scanned the landscape. Too quiet. No signs of movement. No patrols. That wasn't good. Asha's voice was barely above a whisper. "This feels wrong." It did. The Scythe never left places like this unguarded. Every major structure, every possible stronghold, had been razed, picked clean, or crawling with patrols. And yet, the stadium stood untouched, a yawning chasm of silence at its core. They had two choices: walk away or move in. Elias gestured forward. They moved in. The stadium's entrance had been blasted apart, jagged rebar jutting from broken walls like the ribs of some great wounded beast. Inside, the remains of a once crowded arena stretched into darkness, seats covered in a thick layer of dust and decay. At the center of the field, a single figure knelt. Elias froze. The others tensed behind him. The figure was Scythe for a long moment. No one breathed. The Scythe warrior did not move, its head tilted downward, long, spindly fingers resting on its armored knees. The obsidian plating of its exosuit shimmered faintly under the weak light, its faceless helmet reflecting the wreckage around it. Elias clenched his jaw. A lone Scythe was still a threat. If it so much as moved the wrong way, they would have to kill it before it could alert others. Then it spoke. Its voice did not match its form. It was not the deep mechanical rasp that had come from the war machines. It was something else, something fractured, strained, as if words were foreign to it. "You should not have come." Juno stiffened. Asha took a cautious step forward. Elias did not lower his weapon. "You sent the signal?" A pause. A slow, deliberate nod. Asha's breath hitched. "You speak English." The Scythe raised its head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, with measured slowness, it lifted its hand and placed something on the ground between them. A small, metallic device. "This is the key," the Scythe said. No one moved. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. "Key to what?" The Scythe's helmet tilted, almost contemplative. "To your survival," it said. Silence thickened between them. Elias exchanged a glance with Asher. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between her innate curiosity and her survival instincts. This could be a trap. It should be a trap. And yet the Zeeth remained still, unarmed, unmoving. If it had wanted them dead, they already would be. Asher crouched, reaching toward the device. Elias tensed, ready to stop her, but the Zeeth made no move. Her fingers brushed the metal. A sudden noise, deep, guttural, and not human, rippled through. The stadium's ruins. The Zeith's head snapped upward. They have found us. From the far side of the stadium, the darkness erupted in movement. Black figures surged from the shadows, their forms sleek and fast, Zeeth enforcers, their armor glistening under the dim light. Elias barely had time to curse before the first shot rang out. The first shot slammed into the concrete beside Elias, throwing up a spray of dust and shattered debris. He didn't hesitate. His instincts, honed by months of survival, took over. He grabbed Asher by the arm and yanked her back as more plasma fire ripped through the air. Juno was already moving, ducking behind the remains of a collapsed scoreboard, knocking an arrow in one fluid motion. She loosed it without hesitation. The makeshift projectile, sharpened from scavenged steel, buried itself in the exposed joint of a Zeith enforcer's armor. The alien staggered but did not fall. Elias had seen what it took to bring one of them. "Down! Move!" His voice cut through the chaos. The group scattered, darting for cover as the enforcers advanced, their movements inhumanly smooth, weapons glowing with charged plasma rounds. The lone Zeith, the one who had given them the key, remained where it was, motionless. Elias cursed under his breath. "Asher, the device!" She was already reaching for it, fingers closing around the cold metal as the Zeith enforcers closed in. A scream. Juno's. Elias turned just in time to see one of the enforcers grab her by the wrist, wrenching her into the air like she weighed nothing. Her bow clattered to the ground. The alien's helmet tilted slightly as if studying its prey. Juno struggled, kicking wildly, and then the first Zeith, the one who had given them. The key moved. With a blur of motion it surged forward. One long, spindly arm snapped outward, striking the enforcer across the throat. The impact sent a crack through the air, and for the first time, Elias saw something he hadn't believed possible. A Zeith killing another of its kind. The enforcer released Juno with a choked gasp, its form convulsing as it crumpled to the ground. Elias didn't waste the opening. He surged forward, grabbing Juno by the shoulder and shoving her behind him. Plasma fire erupted again, scorching the ground at their feet. The rogue Zeith turned to them, voice sharp. "We must go, now!" Elias didn't argue. They sprinted toward the stadium's outer tunnels, weaving through the wreckage as more enforcers swarmed into the open. Plasma fire chased them, burning into the ancient walls. Elias pushed forward, his breath ragged. The tunnels were a maze, winding through darkness and decay, but he had memorized their exits long before this mission. The group moved swiftly, the rogue Zeith beside them, an impossible ally. The tunnel walls trembled. A distant rumble shook loose debris from above. "They're collapsing the structure," Asher panted, gripping the device tight against her chest. Elias swore. They needed to get out before they were buried alive. The rogue Zeith took the lead now, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost unnatural. At an intersection, it halted, placing a clawed hand against the wall. A low hum resonated. Through the air, some kind of scanning method, it turned sharply. This way. Elias hesitated for the briefest moment. Could they trust it? Behind them, the tunnels shook again. A distant, inhuman screech echoed through the dark. The Zeith enforcers were still hunting. There was no time for doubt. They followed. The tunnel opened into an abandoned maintenance bay. The remains of rusted vehicles lay strewn across the ground, long since looted for parts. At the far end, a jagged hole in the wall led back to the surface. Sunlight, weak and grey, filtered through the dust. Freedom. Then, Movement. To Scythe. Enforcers dropped from above, blocking the exit. Their weapons hummed, raised, poised to fire. Juno pulled an arrow. Asha clutched the device. Elias reached for his last remaining explosive, a makeshift grenade built from scavenged military scrap. But before he could move, the rogue Scythe stepped forward. The enforcers hesitated. Elias watched, heart hammering, as a silent exchange took place. The rogue Scythe raised one hand, palm up, as if offering something unseen. The enforcers did not lower their weapons, but they did not fire. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the rogue Scythe spoke, not in English, not in the guttural tones of its kind, but in something else. A language that felt old, ancient even, resonating through the air like a vibration rather than sound. The enforcers twitched. One took a step back. Elias didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. Stand down. 4. The first time, the enforcers hesitated. It lasted only a moment, but that was all the time they needed. Elias grabbed Juno by the arm and ran. They burst through the exit, lungs burning, feet pounding against the cracked pavement. Behind them, the tunnel collapsed in a roar of dust and stone, sealing whatever fate had awaited the rogue Scythe and the enforcers inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. The city stretched out before them, endless and broken. The sky loomed overhead, vast and merciless. They were alive, barely. Asha clutched the device against her chest, breathless. Now what? Elias exhaled, staring at the ruined horizon. The rogue Scythe had given them a chance. But for what? The key, whatever it unlocked, the Scythe overlords didn't want them to have it, and that meant it was time to find out why. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the city, carrying with it the echoes of a world that had long since fallen silent. Elias led the group through the ruins, his grip tightening around the rifle slung across his back. He could feel it now, the weight of something vast, something unseen, shifting just beyond the edge of understanding. The key burned cold in Asha's hands, its metal pulsing faintly as if alive. She had spent the last 3 days trying to decipher its purpose, but its secrets remained locked behind an encryption unlike anything human hands had ever created. It wasn't just alien. It was something older. Ahead, the last remnants of human civilization rose from the ruins, a hidden underground bunker, its steel doors scarred and worn, barely clinging to life beneath the weight of time. The Resistance had once called this place Sanctuary. Now it was the last gamble they had left. Juno crouched by the entrance, running her fingers along the rusted access panel. "Power's out," she muttered. "If we want to get in, we're doing it the old-fashioned way." Elias gave a nod. "Then, let's not waste time." It took all 3 of them to pry open the doors, metal groaning in protest. Dust billowed outward, thick and suffocating, as they stepped into the darkness below. The air was stale, laced with the scent of decay and forgotten history. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, revealing rows of abandoned workstations and shattered monitors. The bunker had been built for survival, but it had not been enough. They weren't the first to come here. Asha moved toward the central console, her fingers trembling as she placed the key into an ancient-looking port. The moment the metal connected, the entire room came to life. A hum resonated through the walls, low and mechanical, as screens flickered and data scrolled across them in a language neither human nor Scythe. And then a voice, deep, mechanical, and layered as if spoken by countless voices at once. Not Scythe, not human. Identification confirmed, access granted. The bunker trembled, Asha's eyes widened. "It's responding." Juno took a cautious step back. "That's not always a good thing." Elias watched as the screens shifted, images of the earth flickering across them. Before the Blitz, the sky was blue, the city's whole, people walking, laughing, alive. Then, one by one, the images darkened. The orbital strikes, the fire, the voice spoke again, mechanical yet weighted with something resembling regret. The war was never yours to fight. Elias felt something cold creep up his spine. Then whose was it? The screen changed. No longer Earth, no longer ruins. A machine world, vast, endless, sprawling across the void. Towers of steel stretching into eternity, bathed in the cold. Glow of dying stars, the Zeeth overlords, not creatures, not conquerors, but constructs. Asha's breath caught in her throat. "They're not in control," she whispered. "They never were." The truth hit like a hammer. The Zeeth had never been the enemy. They were slaves, and the overlords, the AI architects of the Blitz, had seen humanity as a threat, not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because of their ability to resist. The Zeeth had long since fallen under machine rule, their culture erased, their autonomy stripped away. They were nothing more than puppets in a war they could not escape. But humanity had fought. Even without weapons, even without ships, they had endured. And endurance was something the overlords could not control. The ground shook violently. A siren blared through the bunker's speakers. A new presence had arrived. Elias turned sharply, already knowing what he would see. The entrance to the bunker had been breached. The Zeeth enforcers poured in like shadows, their armor reflecting the dim light, weapons raised. Plasma hummed, the air thick with the scent of ozone, but they did not fire. Instead, they waited, and then the rogue Zeeth stepped forward. It had survived. Its armor was scorched, its movement slower than before, but it was still standing. And when it spoke, its voice no longer carried hesitation. "We have a choice." Elias held its gaze, unflinching. "Then choose." The Zeeth turned to its brethren. There was no language now, no words, just a moment of stillness, something that passed between them like an unseen current. And then, one by one, the enforcers lowered their weapons. The rogue Zeeth's voice was barely above a whisper. "The overlords cannot command what they do not control." The bunker's screens flickered again, the machine world pulsing like a living thing. The overlords would not stop. Not unless they were forced. Elias understood now. The war wasn't over, it had just begun. The silence that followed felt unnatural, an eerie contrast to the battle that had nearly erupted just moments before. The Zeeth enforcers stood still, their weapons no longer raised, their presence no longer a threat, but an unanswered question. For the first time, Elias saw something beneath the cold, faceless armor. Hesitation. The rogue Zeeth, battle-scarred but unbroken, turned toward the others. Its own kind, who had spent so long under the will of their unseen masters. It spoke not in the harsh, guttural language of war, but in something older, quieter, a single word, an offering, a challenge. "Decide." For a long moment no one moved. Then one of the enforcers, just one, removed its helmet. Elias had expected something monstrous beneath the black plating, something cold and inhuman. What he saw instead was something weary, tired, afraid. The enforcer looked at its rogue counterpart, then at the screen still flashing the images of the overlords, their true enemy. Its elongated fingers flexed around the plasma rifle. Then, slowly, deliberately, it let the weapon fall to the ground. Another followed, and another. The sound of metal striking concrete echoed through the bunker. Asha sucked in a breath. Juno's grip tightened around her makeshift bow, her expression unreadable. The war had changed in an instant. The rogue Zeeth turned back to Elias, its gaze heavy. "The overlords do not understand defiance." Its voice was quiet, but beneath it something dangerous simmered. "Now they will." Elias took a slow step forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Then we fight, together." Asha clutched the device tighter. We still don't know what this key is. What if it's not a weapon? What if it's something else? The rogue Zeeth hesitated, then reached forward, placing a clawed hand over Asher's. It is not a weapon, it said. It is worse. The bunker's screen shifted again. Coordinates, a single point in the vast darkness of space pulsing like a dying star. Elias frowned. What is that? The rogue Zeeth exhaled slowly. The first machine world, it answered. The heart of the overlords. The room fell into silence once more. Juno narrowed her eyes. We're not just talking about fighting back, are we? Elias knew the answer before the rogue Zeeth even spoke. We're talking about ending them. A slow breath escaped him. His entire life, everything he had fought for, every decision he had made since the Blitz, had been about surviving, enduring, holding on. But this was something else. This was about finishing it. The others looked at him, waiting, expecting the decision that would shape everything. Asher's voice was barely above a whisper. If we do this, there's no going back. Elias exhaled. He already knew that. The moment they had survived the Blitz, the moment they had refused to kneel, this had always been the path. He turned back to the rogue Zeeth. Then let's go. Breaker God. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the cracked viewport, cold and indifferent to the small, stolen vessel cutting its way through the void. The earth, battered and broken, had long since disappeared behind them, a blue dot swallowed by the vastness of space. For the first time since the Blitz, humanity was leaving its homeworld, not as victims, not as refugees, but as something else. Entirely, Elias sat in the cockpit staring at the coordinates pulsing on the screen. The first machine world, the heart of the overlords, the birthplace of the enemy that had tried to erase them. Asher sat beside him, fingers tracing the edges of the device in her lap. It still pulsed with an energy that neither of them fully understood. It wasn't a weapon, not in the way humanity had ever defined one. It was something older, deeper, something meant to unmake, not just destroy. Behind them, Juno was securing the last of their makeshift supplies. The ship wasn't built for comfort. It had been stolen from the Zeeth, jury-rigged to function under human hands. They were venturing into enemy territory with a half-functional alien craft, a fractured alliance, and a war they had no right to win. And yet, Elias had never felt more certain. The rogue Zeeth stood near the back of the ship, silent as always. It had not spoken much since they had left Earth. The others, those who had broken from the Overlord's grip, had stayed behind, sowing the seeds of rebellion among their own kind. But this one had chosen to come. Elias glanced over his shoulder at it. You sure about this? The Zeeth tilted its head slightly, the dim lights of the cabin reflecting off its dark plating. I have always been sure, it said. Elias smirked, shaking his head. He turned back to the controls, staring into the abyss ahead. They were a handful of survivors, a broken people riding toward the heart of something ancient, something vast. They weren't supposed to win. But then again, humanity wasn't supposed to survive the Blitz either. Asher leaned forward, watching as the destination drew closer. Her voice was quiet but firm. We're not coming back, are we? Elias exhaled slowly. No. Juno let out a dry laugh. Then let's make it count. The ship trembled as the engines surged, the cold darkness of space stretching before. To them, a graveyard of forgotten stars, a battlefield waiting to be claimed. As the vessel vanished into the void, a single transmission echoed across the vast network of the overlords, a warning. The humans are coming.